and welcome history buffs! My name is Nick Hodges and today's review will be We Were Soldiers. Based on the book We Were Soldiers Once and Young by Lieutenant General Hal Moore and war journalist Joseph Galloway, this is the story about America's first major battle in the Vietnam War, where 400 American soldiers were surrounded by an NVA division of 4,000 men in the central highlands of Vietnam. Unlike its more notable predecessors though, this is a Vietnam War movie that is more focused on the history behind the conflict rather than the controversial politics we have come to expect. So taking a back seat are the F-bombs, the N-words and the G-words, and put at the forefront instead are the tactics and strategies of the real battles and the men who fought them. All necessary ingredients to making a good historical film, but does it guarantee a good Vietnam War movie? Well, let's find out in We Were Soldiers. So the film begins in 1964 at the height of the Cold War. The Western world's eyes were locked on a remote corner of Southeast Asia called Vietnam. Gone were the days of its French imperialism, and a new question formed on everyone's mind. Would Vietnam's future ultimately be based under a regime of capitalism or communism? Following the end of the Indochina War, a ceasefire was agreed upon by French and Viet Minh forces at the Geneva Conference of 1954. It was then decided that Vietnam was to be temporarily divided at the 17th parallel with the Communist North and the Capitalist South. This was under promise that France would withdraw from the conflict and the country, officially ending decades of French imperial rule. There was also to be an election in 1956 for a single Vietnamese government to reunify the country. However, America chose to misinterpret the temporary ceasefire as temporary, preferring much more instead to consider it as a permanent division between a communist North and a capitalist South. The reason behind this thinking was that the North was predicted to win the 1956 election due to its higher population. America's main fear was that if Vietnam was to be unified under a single communist government, then communism would eventually spread throughout the whole of Southeast Asia. So it comes as no surprise when the reunification election was cancelled, and this was probably the biggest spark that ignited the Vietnam War. And this is where the movie kicks in. By 1964, America wasn't officially involved in Vietnam, but it had been supporting the South with military aid and advisors for quite some time. However, it didn't escape them that this conflict would inevitably escalate, and result with their direct military involvement. So it prepared for this by rethinking its tactics and introducing new technologies, most notably the helicopter, which would give them a huge advantage in being able to commit its forces absolutely anywhere. Armed with this, its economic wealth, and its position as a superpower, America was confident of an easy victory within a matter of months. When making We Were Soldiers, Randall Wallace, the writer and director of the film, had one main objective. When reading the book in which the film was to be based on, he came across a passage talking about the Vietnam War, which said, "Hollywood got it wrong every damn time." With these words in mind, he focused on trying to get it right, and that is certainly a noble undertaking. I mean, I wish more filmmakers thought this way. Now, regarding the passage, I can kind of understand where that book is coming from.
Motherfucker!
The thing is that, when we think of the Vietnam War, what do we usually think of? Apart from it obviously having the best soundtrack of all time, we think of the quintessential Vietnam War movie, and our minds usually wander to a select few from the 70s and 80s. The main ones being Apocalypse Now, Deer Hunter Platoon, Full Metal Jacket and Casualties of War. All of them, without a doubt, are some of the best films in American cinema, but were they made in mind to accurately portray the Vietnam War? Probably not. Instead, the main focus of those movies is to portray the insanity of war and the loss of innocence. History takes a backseat in these historical depictions, and political and philosophical motifs are at the forefront to be analysed instead. Now, despite them not being accurate, they certainly were authentic and captured the chaos and brutality of that conflict. However, these films are so ingrained into pop culture that scenes that once moved us now make us laugh.
Survive!
Scenes that once shocked us now just generally entertain and amuse us. And why not? These characters and their performances are just as crazy and eccentric as the movies themselves. They're really fun to watch.
Do you suck dicks?
Sir, no, sir!
Are you a Peter Pupper?
Sir, no, sir!
I'll bet you're the kind of guy that would fuck a person in the ass and not even have the goddamn common courtesy to give him a reach around. I'll be watching you.
I mean, even if someone who has never seen any of these movies, they will still recognize them when they're on screen. And because they're so over the top, their initial success has, in a way, led our interpretation of the Vietnam War to become slightly stylized.
I'm going for the flag. You shouldn't do that. Why not?
We're deep in enemy territory. We've got to choose our moment carefully.
This place is swarming with ace. They're not just in the jungle. They are the jungle. What do you think this is? Vietnam? Yeah.
Now, am I saying that We Were Soldiers is better than those movies? Of course not. What I'm saying is that it was made with historical accuracy in mind, and for all intents and purposes, it mostly succeeds. Some of the most horrific moments in the film were recreated under the supervision of Lieutenant General Hal Moore and Joseph Galloway, who were in the actual battle. One scene in particular stands out, and from the way Joseph Galloway describes it, they definitely got those scenes right.
And in that flame, I could see these two men dancing and screaming. And someone yelled, "Get this man's feet." And I reached down and picked him up, and his boots crumbled. The flesh on his ankles just peeled off. I could feel the ankle bone in the palm of my hands. And we carried him over to where the wounded were. It was a young specialist named Jim Nakayama out of Rigby, Idaho. Married. Wife had a baby that week. He died 2 days later.
Now, as much as Randall Wallace makes a big deal about wanting to get it right, there's one scene in the movie that completely contradicts that objective. Now, if you want to make a historically accurate film, then you have to be authentic to the times in which it's set in. And it's scenes like this that pisses me off to no end.
In the meantime, the laundromat in town's okay, but they won't let you wash your colored things in their machines.
At a public laundromat?
Didn't make any sense to me either, but I'm telling you, they have a big sign right in the window says whites only. What?
Honey, they mean white people only.
That's awful. Your husband is wearing the uniform of a country that allows a place to say that his laundry's not good enough when he could die for... I'm sorry.
That's all right, honey.
Movie, are you seriously trying to tell me that this woman is so fucking gormless that she's only learning about racial segregation now? It's 1964! It's the height of the civil rights movement, one of the biggest and most influential political movements in US history! She should know this stuff simply by being alive. Honestly, what was going through her mind when she was watching the march in Washington in 1963?
I have a dream that one day
Oh my god, this guy's like so boring. Why is everyone telling me to watch this? There's no racism in this country. It must be like some sort of like liberal agenda or something. I'm gonna change the channel. I like cartoons.
Although We Were Soldiers is predominantly based on the Battle of the Ardrang Valley, it actually summarizes really well how the world's greatest superpower was defeated. This scene in particular speaks volumes about America's overconfidence and ill-fated decision to underestimate its enemy, and especially its military victories in the past.
White House anticipates a buildup and wants a victory over cavemen in black pajamas.
We wouldn't be there if they hadn't already beaten the French army.
The French army? What's that?
Now, this just could be potential French bashing, but I'm gonna give this movie the benefit of the doubt because this kind of arrogance is exactly what the mindset of America's leaders was prior to the war. If they bothered to take the threat of North Vietnam seriously, they would then understand that they were facing an enemy with 20 years of combat experience on its own ground, and an enemy that had successfully defeated Japanese occupation in World War II and the French in the First Indochina War. Yes, cavemen in black pajamas managed to defeat both the empires of Japan and France. But America chose to ignore this because it was convinced that just its aerial power alone would simply bomb North Vietnam into submission. By the war's end, they had dropped more bombs than all the Allied and Axis powers did in World War II, and in the end it achieved very little. Once in Vietnam, another problem came up where, aside from difficulties with its jungle environment, American troops had no real fixed objectives to take. This wouldn't be like World War II where they would take one position then move on to the next. So instead they operated under search and destroy missions.
Simple orders, Hal. Find the enemy and kill him.
And it didn't take long before the Vietnamese discovered flaws in their execution. As shown in the movie, the Americans would usually bomb an area with either artillery or airstrikes to prepare a landing zone for its soldiers. Once they arrived by helicopter, they would then comb the surrounding area to hunt down enemy combatants. However, all this really did was alert the North Vietnamese that the Americans were on their way. They might as well have shot up a giant flare in the sky to mark their position because they both pretty much achieved the same thing in the end, as any advantage and surprise was lost. It was through this very way that the Vietnamese were able to predict exactly when and where the Americans would attack. Another thing is that this allowed the Vietnamese to choose whether or not they wanted to fight. Since many of their bases were built underground, if they decided not to fight, then they would just let the Americans walk right by them. Out of all the engagements in the Vietnam War, most were chosen by the North Vietnamese. Another advantage that the North Vietnamese had over the Americans was the will to fight. Now, I'm not trying to downplay their importance or courage, but the fact of the matter is that many of the American soldiers were draftees, and the average conscript simply wanted to do his years of service and just get back home alive. Whereas a North Vietnamese soldier absolutely believed they were fighting for their country, and not just for communism as America believed at the time. There's a minor character in the movie that really helps show the average NVA soldier's commitment to fighting this war. We see a young man writing to his wife on the front line before the second day of the battle. Now, there's nothing especially intimidating about this man, He's quite thin and wears glasses and overall just appears to be an average guy. And he appears even more so the next time we see him. We can tell that he's completely terrified by the way he hesitates, shaking this notion that the American soldiers are dealing with suicidal fanatics and not with genuine human beings who are just as scared as they are. Just by us seeing him write to his wife, we know that this character has something to live for, and yet without hesitation, he throws it all away with a bayonet charge. This small character personifies North Vietnam's unshaking will and determination to resist this foreign power. So what was America's answer in fighting and defeating such an enemy? Well, this is summarized perfectly in We Were Soldiers. Over the course of the movie, we see almost non-stop fighting as the Americans gun down wave after wave of NVA and Viet Cong soldiers. This film truly captures how horrific and intense this battle was, and it can't be stated enough the bravery it took for both the Americans and the Vietnamese to fight in such appalling conditions. Amidst napalm and artillery strike to machine gun fire to sometimes fighting with just their bare hands, it really must have been hell on earth. And so when the Americans finally prevail and win the battle, the aftermath is almost as shocking as the battle itself was. We as an audience are given time to breathe and really think about what we just watched. This is after all a reenactment of a battle that really took place, and with all this death and destruction we witnessed, what did it really achieve in the end? While the Americans certainly achieved their original objective of finding their enemy and killing him, their claimed victory is seen as even more incredible by the fact that they survived against such terrible odds. However, in the immediate aftermath of the battle, when the Americans pack up their dead and wounded, they leave, and the North Vietnamese come right back in, and what follows is without a doubt my favourite scene in the entire film. This little moment right here not only encompasses the harsh reality of this battle, but also alludes at what is to come.
Thật là một tin thật. Bọn họ tưởng đây là chiến thắng của họ. Và cuộc chiến này sẽ trở thành là một cuộc chiến của người Mỹ. Với kết quả giống nhau, mọi người sẽ chết ở đây trước khi chúng ta đến đó.
This battle would set the precedent for how the rest of this war would be fought by America. Without clear objectives to take, the Americans would instead claim their victories not by territory gained, but by body count. Their theory being that this method of attrition would prove to be the decisive point in winning this war.
I'm thinking of the intent of the mission. Everything we've fought in the past has been to gain ground.
Yes, but you know, the basic mission of any military force is to destroy the enemy or his will to fight. And it's been our tradition since we were tied to the ground to translate that into terms of ground objectives. But that was never the real purpose. That just helped you achieve the end. Here we can free ourselves of those ground considerations and we go more directly for the enemy, wherever he may be.
What was originally thought to be won within a matter of months lasted 8 years for the United States and claimed the lives of over 58,000 Americans and untold millions of Vietnamese. In the end, it was instead the American people who lost their will to fight, sick of an endless cycle of violence and empty promises of a victory within sight. In 1973, the United States finally submitted to public pressure and withdrew from the war, and within 2 years, South Vietnam was finally annexed by the North. Overall, I'd say that We Were Soldiers is a good historical movie to watch. Once I started researching the Battle of the Ia Drang Valley, it was clear to me how much the filmmakers respected the source material, and their attempt to make this battle as true to life as possible really shows on the screen. And I also have to applaud and recognise Randall Wallace's decision to present us with a non-biased film, taking the time and the effort to highlight the courage and the sacrifice both the Americans and the Vietnamese made in this tragic battle. However, I can't ignore key moments here and there that really ruin my viewing experience. It really baffles me as to why they're even there in the first place, because I'd be enjoying what's going on in the movie and then they would spoil it by going so over the top. Like this really out of place scene that is so brimming with American patriotism, it makes my eyes roll to the back of my head.
I'm glad I could die for my country.
And not 2 seconds later, they slap in another generic war movie death scene.
Tell my wife.
Come on! I know it sounds like I'm nitpicking here, but this is so cliched. If you have to write a death scene, then do it in an original way. This feels like it's just ticking a box of what to include in a war movie. There's a reason why we make fun of death scenes like this.
I've got to sleep. No, Mike, stay with me. So tired. No, Mike. So tired. On a battle, friend. No, Mike.
And don't get me started on any scenes with the kids. Their performances and the writing feel so forced and artificial, it makes me cringe every time it's on screen. The decision on putting them there must have been like, how do we get the audience to care about Hal more? I know, let's make his kids as cute as possible. They could waddle around in his jump boots and sing bingo.
Hey, how about we go back to bingo? What do you say? Bingo!
And bingo was his name. I was just so fucking stupid. It really takes me out of the movie, and that makes it that much harder for me to tell you to watch it. As for this performance, I have no idea why they decided to go with this take. Rather than inspiring empathy, it just honestly makes me laugh. Anyway, aside from these various hiccups, We Were Soldiers' successes outweigh its mistakes in the long run. Whether they truly got it right is up for debate, but any true history buff will be able to see that at least they tried. Randall Wallace may have disregarded the politics we have come to expect from a Vietnam War movie, but special care and attention was made instead to accurately recreate an important battle from a very controversial war. And the fact that We Were Soldiers goes beyond that to summarize that entire conflict and its inevitable outcome shows us the maturity and dedicated research that went into its execution. My only true complaint is that I wish Randall Wallace made that same effort when writing Braveheart. But that's perhaps best left for another review for another day. Well, that about wraps it up. My name is Nick Hodges, and thanks for watching, History Buffs. And remember, if you like the show, help the channel grow. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. And let me know in the comment section as well what you thought about We Were Soldiers. And of course, what historical film should I review next? Until then, I'll see you next time.